And thanks to Alderman Hairston and everybody here at the Black United Fund of Illinois. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you to announce that we are taking a major step forward to legalize adult use cannabis and to celebrate the fact that Illinois is going to have the most equity-centric law in the nation. But before we tell you more about that, the first, Lieutenant Governor Stratton has always been a tireless voice for justice, equity, and opportunity, and she is an advocate that you always want on your side. And most importantly, I want to recognize all of the community members and nonprofits and families who have fought tirelessly to educate elected officials and their communities. You have helped all of us focus on what it means to take an equitable approach to legalizing adult use cannabis. For the many individuals and families whose lives have been changed, indeed hurt, because the nation's war on drugs discriminated against people of color, this day belongs to you too. During last year's campaign, I promised that getting this right would be an important priority for me as governor. And while today's announcement is a major step, everyone here is committed to continuing to listen to the members of the General Assembly and our communities during the next several weeks to understand their ideas for improving this measure. Our doors are open. Over the past several weeks, many of those here today and stakeholders across the state joined 6 working groups to deliberate on the various components of legislation. Working groups looked at and incorporated best practices from other states that have legalized. The working groups also left behind what hasn't worked in other states and instead are proposing first-in-the-nation programs to make sure that Illinois is a leader in equity. Starting with equity as our North Star, this framework reflects some of our most deeply held priorities for legalization. Equity guided the conversation on every component of this process, from licensing and revenue to sentencing laws and expungement. In hindsight, a lot of states got it wrong on licensing because their programs ended up with the unintended consequence of a consolidated marketplace where only a few profit. And those communities that have been hurt are on the outside looking in. To start, for those who want to get a license, we're creating a designation for social equity applicants. Our approach makes Illinois the first state in the nation to place status as a social equity applicant into the core scoring system for applications. Okay. This will ensure that the licensing process takes into account the barriers to entry that have prevented disadvantaged communities from participating in other states. Qualified social equity applicants will also be able to tap into the nation's first low-interest loan program. This fund of roughly $20 million will help applicants who wouldn't otherwise have a shot at opening these businesses. That means that new up-and-coming entrepreneurs can start and build businesses here in Illinois and create good jobs. 25% of sales revenue from marijuana will go directly back into the communities that have been most negatively impacted by discrimination in the prosecution of drug laws in the criminal justice system. We're establishing, And we're establishing the Restoring Our Communities grant program to share those funds with the communities that need it most. And for those who've been convicted of minor drug charges, this framework also starts a process to expunge those offenses. This measure includes a common sense and thorough process involving law enforcement and prosecutors to review records and move forward quickly. Safety was also a critical dimension that needed to be addressed for Illinois families. As a parent myself, I had to know that all Illinois children would be safe if we moved forward with this. We brought together medical experts and stakeholders like Lurie Children's Hospital and Illinois Public Health Institutes to develop regulations that protect the health of our children and our families. Adult use cannabis will only include those 21 and over. The program also includes regulation on potency and possession limits. We also lay out clear guidelines on packaging, ensuring that it is child resistant and includes full warning labels. And we made sure that 20% of the sales revenue will be going to programs that help with mental health and substance abuse. Let me make sure I say that correctly. We made sure that 20% of the revenue will be going to the programs that will help mental health and substance abuse programs. These are a few core elements of a comprehensive framework for legalization. As we move forward, we will continue to welcome suggestions and feedback from everyone with a stake in what this looks like. And you'll hear a lot from others today about what this bill will do. Thank you again to everybody who contributed their time, their ideas, and their diligence and hard work to this process. What we're presenting here is nothing short of historic in what it will do for equity and justice in Illinois. And I'm so proud to see us move forward. Now, I'd like to introduce the Senate's chief sponsor of this bill and someone who has been a champion for years, Senator Heather Steans.
Kelly Cassidy and I first introduced this bill over 2 years ago. I'd come to the conclusion that prohibition simply does not work. Nearly 800,000 Illinoisans use cannabis on a regular basis, with over 95% of those purchasing it in the illicit market. Too often we have unsafe products that are laced with rat poison and fentanyl. We hear about people dying from this. Teens report easy access. 4 out of 5 teens say it's easy access to cannabis products. And communities have been devastated by the impacts of the war on drugs. We've seen this around the state. We clearly needed better policy on this. And significant policy change, though, merits the deep kind of consideration we've been giving. We started, Kelly and I, by learning from other states, both visiting other states with many of the legislators that are here, having them come here and testify in hearings. We've held community meetings and town halls throughout the state. Many of them literally met with hundreds of stakeholders on this bill to seek their input. And what we have in the bill today really reflects this diversity of views and inputs that we've come to. But throughout all of that work, we've heard basically 3 overriding goals come out consistently on what we're trying to achieve. First and foremost, public safety. Second, social equity has been key and really been driving our work on this. And then by getting those policies right, getting revenue into the state. And this is another way of saying that pretty much everyone who's been involved on this really does share a lot in common about what we're trying to achieve here. We want safety for our kids and the public in cannabis products and keeping it away from our kids. We want social justice, working to address all the harm that has been done by the war on drugs for so many of our communities. And we want revenue that, instead of going to the illicit market, comes and benefits the people in Illinois. As a mother of 3 kids, I think the bill's impact on public safety and health has to be foundational, and we've really set some of those markers out in the bill. Only adults, as the governor said, 21 years and older, will have access to cannabis. IDs will be scanned, and checked for the age of 21, unlike what you're getting on the street corner. There'll be strong educational campaign about the risks of using cannabis, and this will be led by a newly created Adult Use Cannabis Public Health Advisory Committee, so we'll have a way of monitoring what's going on and getting input on an ongoing basis. And one of the things we learned in studying the experience of Colorado is we need to standardize the dosing of edibles and control the way they're marketed and packaged. The bill limits the amount of THC that's going to be allowed in a total package and serving sizes, and we're going to be vigilant in ensuring that the products cannot be marketed to youth. No advertising will be allowed within 1,000 feet of the perimeter of schools, playgrounds, hospitals, child care centers, and other places where kids congregate. Products cannot have false or misleading information on them. No advertising can promote excessive consumption, depict a person under 21 years of age consuming, include an image of a cannabis leaf, or include any image that's designed or likely to appeal to minors, including cartoons, toys, animals, children, or other images that are popularly used to advertise to kids. All of that will be banned. And all products must be packaged and sealed in child-resistant packages, labels contained, featuring very strong warning labels on them. And all products will be listed, and so you know exactly what you're purchasing, and you can't get something that's got an unsafe fentanyl or other item in it. A significant portion of the revenue, as the governor mentioned, will go back into communities to help prevent substance abuse and provide treatment for substance abuse and mental health disorders. And the bill protects the rights of municipalities to put further restrictions on. If a local municipality wants to opt out and not have any cannabis in their community, they can do so. And these public health and safety measures will further solidify Illinois as a position, as a real model for how well regulated our cannabis industry is. We are a model for how tightly regulated we are. However, I believe this approach to the social equity we're doing on this will now also establish us as the gold standard on how to address the issues of social equity and injustice that have occurred by the war on drugs. As you're going to hear more from a lot of my colleagues, and you heard briefly from the governor, we have taken a three-pronged approach to advancing equity in the bill. Expunging records, ensuring diversity in the cannabis industry. While Illinois has been a real model for how well regulated our products are, we are not a diverse industry right now. And the third is that we'll be dedicating the portion of the revenue to communities that have been hurt by the war on drugs in a disproportional fashion. Ending prohibition is a tremendous step forward, and it's time to bring cannabis sales into the light where they are regulated to ensure safety and tax so the revenue can help benefit the state. It is time to bring restorative justice to communities that have been devastated by the war on drugs, and it is time to create opportunities for minority entrepreneurs. I'm very proud to have been a part of the effort here to bring Illinois more into a safe and sane future. And I have the great honor of bringing up Kelly Cassidy now, who's been a great partner in crime in trying to get the work done on this bill along with everyone else here. Come on up, Kelly.
Thank you, Heather. I do feel like we've spent the better part of the last 2 years living together. When we started this process, we knew this wasn't going to be easy. We knew that all of the other states prior to us that have legalized have done so through ballot initiative. Vermont sort of did a half measure. But what we're trying to do, as Heather said, is set that gold standard with comprehensive reform legislation that will move Illinois forward and bring us to the forefront of how to do this right. We set about with the very deliberate goal of getting it right. As we started this journey, really the four of us that have spent the most time together, we were four moms and very real girlfriends, to be perfectly honest with you. Senator Staines and Hutchinson, Representative Gordon Booth and I, we were focused on changing the failed policy of prohibition. We were focused on the impact on children, not just ours, but all of the kids of Illinois. And we were laser focused on bringing equity to an issue that has inflicted so many wounds on communities. The language today represents all of that engagement, but I want to be very clear. It is not the end of the discussion, and I look forward to getting input and feedback as we can work towards an even better final product. Too much is at stake for us to not get this right. This issue involves social justice, equity, economic opportunity, and revenue. It involves job creation, healthcare, and responsible regulation. We have a fairness problem with the way cannabis laws have been enforced. We have to check that box. We have to get that right. We need restorative justice for communities that have been devastated by the war on drugs, and we need to create opportunities for minority entrepreneurs. When we introduce adult use cannabis, we need to ensure that it's not a small group of people getting very rich. We want to make a lot of new business leaders in this state through this process. And one step towards that, we are creating different types of licenses so that entrepreneurs and small businesses can participate in this new market. This legislation will do that. And as we've said, we do need revenue. And I've said from the very beginning, states that have tried to go about this in a way that puts revenue first, they end up with less revenue and a non-functional system. I am so grateful to everyone that's worked on this for understanding that if we get it right, we get it right, and we will get the revenue we need. This has been inclusive and transparent. It will continue to be so. We want to continue to hear from the voters and our stakeholders and our colleagues, but I really do believe we all want the same things. We want social justice, we want safety for our kids, and we want that revenue for our state. As we move to get this legislation passed and to the governor's desk, let's remember some important facts. 10 states, including our neighbor Michigan, have legalized cannabis for adult use. Michigan's law actually is much more broad than ours, with higher possession quantities and higher home grow opportunity. Alcohol, legal product, kills 88,000 people per year, according to the Centers for Disease Control. We're proposing legalizing for adult use a substance that doesn't cause a fatal overdose, and many medical experts believe is not only not harmful, but for some, it is beneficial. Cannabis should be sold in venues that are highly regulated, taking the pot market out of the shadows. Keeping cannabis illegal makes it easier for kids to get, not harder, because there's no regulation. The folks that are dealing on the streets are not carding our kids. Kids report it's easier to get cannabis than alcohol. We joked when we first introduced the bill that we were the coolest moms in school, because we both have seniors in high school, until they started hearing us talk about how we were trying to make it harder for them to get, and that in states that have legalized, you see steady decreases in youth use if you do it right. So, starting January 1, 2020, in our best case scenario, adults over 21 will be able to legally purchase cannabis for recreational use from licensed dispensaries across the state with possession limits. Modest home grow will be available, 5 plants per household, indoor only in a secure space. There will be no changes to the underlying medical cannabis program, and this is critically important, one of those things we learned from looking in the rearview mirror of other states. Patients will be guaranteed access to their medicine. Dispensaries and cultivators will have to set aside products sufficient to meet the demands of patients. We're not going to let folks go without their relief. And most importantly, there will be a measure of restorative justice through expungements and other important steps. We are going to create a safe, legal, and comprehensive regulatory system that allows adults to use cannabis while keeping this product out of the hands of children. And I look forward to completing this journey with everyone.
Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by thanking State Representative Kelly Cassidy and State Senator Heather Staines for your diligent work on this historic piece of legislation. Thank you to the legislators that are here today as well, State Senator Toy Hutchinson, State Representative Jahan Gordon Booth, State Representative Selena Villanueva, State Representative Sonia Harper. I also want to thank all of the members of the Black and Latino caucuses, as well as acknowledge the leadership of Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell on this work. I'm grateful for your persistence, your openness, and your determination to include diverse perspectives. I too want to thank the advocates, organizers, and community members who have worked tirelessly for years to lift up the voices of people from communities across our state, especially those whose voices are not always welcomed at the table. And, as always, Governor Pritzker, I am so proud to serve alongside of you. And I deeply appreciate your commitment to equity, evidenced both through today's announcement as well as through the executive order that you signed early in our administration establishing the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. The goal of the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative is to move us from a strictly punitive approach to criminal justice to one that examines the root causes that often lead to people being entangled in the system, while also creating solutions that put community at the center. Why? Because we have learned that we cannot have real justice without addressing equity and opportunity. And likewise, we cannot have real opportunity without justice and equity. This proposed legislation is true to that mission and spirit. The proposal includes components focused on repairing the harm caused by the failed war on drugs and decades of policies that caused mass incarceration to skyrocket. Those policies have had a disparate and detrimental impact, especially on our Black and brown communities. In fact, research shows that despite fairly equal usage rates, Blacks are over 3.5 times more likely than whites to be arrested for cannabis. Today, we say no more, as we work to ensure that there is justice, equity, and opportunity as Illinois moves to legalize the adult use of cannabis. This legislation proposes the establishment of the Restoring Our Communities, or ROC program, which will invest in communities that have suffered the most from the war on drugs, economic disinvestment, and violence. There will be a diverse group of stakeholders that are making up the ROC board to ensure that there is equitable investment in communities across our state. And just as importantly, the legislation as proposed sets forth a process for people to have their records expunged for past low-level offenses, providing them with the opportunity to restore their lives. This bill establishes a social equity applicant status for licensing, which moves us towards ensuring that we include Black and brown entrepreneurs in the planning and licensing of new cannabis dispensaries. And we all know that the communities which have been devastated by the war on drugs are often the very same communities which suffer from a lack of long-term investment and economic opportunity. New jobs and businesses must be created in these communities because that is the only real path to prosperity, community health, and healing. Work on this legislation has been years in the making, with broad-ranging stakeholders at the table, and the time is now. It's not lost on any of us who apply an equity lens to the conversation about the legalization of adult use cannabis as to the opportunity that is before us. For too many years, communities were ravaged by the failed war on drugs. People and their families were trapped in cycles of incarceration for a small mistake, often committed when they were very young. Many were marked as felons and forced to carry a label that limited their education and economic opportunity. Families were torn apart as loved ones were sent to institutions that disconnected them from their families and communities, and babies exhibited the generational consequences of being raised without a father or perhaps a mother because their parent languished behind bars for the exact same offense that someone else from another community would have suffered no consequence. All paid for by taxpayers. This bill being introduced prioritizes public safety, reduces the over-reliance on incarceration, seeks to repair decades of harm, and reinvest in communities across our state that need it most. And I am so very proud to be a part of this historic step forward for our state. Now is the time, and this is what equity looks like in practice. Thank you. And we will now open it up for any questions from the media.
Thank you. Tom, sorry, I didn't mean to.
What's the status of the home grow? Was that included in the bill?
I'm gonna let Senator
Yes, home grow is included for 5 plants per household, and it has to be kept in a safe and secure location that can't be accessed without, security.
And what other measures the state's taking to make sure like plants aren't being diverted to that?
Well, so this is the right now people we have law enforcement tools right now in a lot of different ways. So local and we have clear provisions that local municipalities can do any inspections and anything when they have concerns. That's still going to be the case. And we also have money, a part of the allocation for the revenue from this goes towards law enforcement so that they can be getting the tools that they believe they need to help enforce at a local level. Be it one of the other concerns we hear a lot about is DUIs, for example, and whether they need new roadside testing. So there's going to be grants also made available to law enforcement to help ensure that they've got the tools that they need. You want to add anything?
I think you covered.
Is there a sense of how many people are currently in prison who have their records expensive purchase or now help?
I can-
Go ahead, yeah.
In terms of who's in prison, that's a little tougher to estimate. We did get the Sentencing Policy Advisory Council gave us some numbers on just on those Class 4 felonies. In a 10-year sample, it affected 8,000 people just on the felony side. Misdemeanors are a little harder to track because they're all stored in a more diffuse way. And they're not in prison. So most of the people that are going to be the currently incarcerated are going to be folks who are in jails for the most part, rather than in the state prison system.
Just from what we've seen so far, it looks like there's not an updated revenue estimate on what this says. I know you relied on 107 million in the budget proposal. Do you have a sense of more or less?
We don't yet know. We're having a revenue estimate done on this bill, but suffice to say that equity was the most important piece of this legislation. I said for 2 years during the campaign and now as governor that there were 3 reasons that we needed to pass this bill. One is that we needed to address the criminal justice aspects of it and restorative justice. Second is safety. And third, and it really is the tertiary issue, is revenue. It's important for the budget, but we can make accommodation in the budget. The most important thing that we're doing is we're creating a new industry, we're doing it in a safe way, and we're bringing criminal justice reform to the fore. Yeah.
And what I would add is what had not been accounted for and the proposed in the budget was that the anticipation here is that doors will open for sales to start January 1st, 2020. So you'll actually have sales from revenue from sales starting, which had not been anticipated. But we will be getting a revenue estimate. Tax structure is also a little different than what we've been talking about before. I think somebody mentioned it's at 10% for under 35% THC levels, 20% for infused products, and 25% tax for products that are over 35% THC levels. And so that's where revenue will be coming in that will be helping GRF.
Structure to discourage people from using higher THC products?
This was like double dutch. This was like legislative double dutch. The tax policy that went into this does a couple of different things. One is you want to make sure that you're not, when you don't keep revenue at the forefront, then you don't get what we've seen in the multiple states where it's literally like, this is going to be the panacea, fix everything, we're going to tax the heck out of it. And the unintended consequence of that is that you don't tamp down on the illicit market. So you want a fair, stable, transparent tax system across the board to make sure that people know it's actually better to do this in regulated, safe environments and not in the shadows. The other thing is that you want to, this is almost along the lines of the way we do alcohol by the levels of alcohol in it. And so that taxation structure is, if you're going to say you're going to tax and regulate like alcohol, that's the basis for those things. And you do want to, we do want to take a very slow approach to how this industry is evolving and how it's growing. And we know that public safety concerns are at the forefront of that as well. And so there have been examples of other states who really didn't get the regulatory part with the tax part correct. And so when those things go divergently, then you end up having way higher concentrations in a way that it's very difficult to control or unring the bell. So all of these conversations are why we put, nothing was in a silo. One thing connected to the other, connected to the other, connected to the other. So the taxation policy also looked at the equity part. The life looked at the equity part. The reduction of the harms from the illicit market looked at the equity part. Every single piece of this was looked at as a whole instead of individually. So that's how the tax policy came up.
Governor, can you address some people here talk about the politics of this and the calls for to slow this down. I was wondering, your view though about what you see in this that would respond to those calls that might actually hang this up in your time.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we had 6 working groups here, and there were legislators on both sides of the aisle that were in those meetings. Anybody who wanted to be part of this was allowed to be part of it. They made their voices known. They certainly have spoken with the sponsors of the bill in both houses. And so I think now what's been put forward is a bill that is reflective of a lot of people's views to make sure that we included that. And in addition, there are several weeks here where people will continue to make their views known. No doubt the bill will make some adjustment before it is finally passed. So I think everybody's voices are being heard, and the calls to, give an opportunity for people's voices to be heard have been heeded.
Ever when to convince anybody to change their mind, basically?
Well, I do look. I think what Senator Staines and Representative Cassidy have done is to brought the facts and the science to the front of the conversation. There's been historical discussion about the evils of marijuana, but you really have to look at it from the perspective of what's actually happening today, what the science really tells us, and that's what they've done. And I think that's convinced a number of people who maybe a couple of years ago would not have favored legalization, but who today do. And I think that process is continuing with representatives and senators.
We've got time for one more. Several of you have mentioned craft growers, but I'm wondering what this measure does for full-size cultivation centers, new full-size cultivation centers.
Do you want to do that? You've got to roll out.
Let me make sure I get this right. Hi, Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell. So what this contemplates is that there would not be new large-scale cultivation in the first wave. That is an effort to make sure that as we roll out a wave of craft grow licenses, that you don't see a situation where the large guys crowd out the smaller folks. There would then be a measure after a timed release to look at a demand study and figure out if we in fact need more large-scale cultivation. If that in fact happens, then the appropriate department can make a determination and issue new licenses.
Great, thank you. Well done, everybody.